What happened when the nice girl finally snapped? Being the professor's teaching assistant meant I had a front row seat to watch the slowest train wreck in academic history unfold over the entire semester. The girl who finally snapped was named Ella, and she was probably the smartest person in that business communications class, which made what happened even worse. Ella was the type of student professors dream about because she actually cared about learning instead of just getting the grade. She always sat third row center, took notes on actual paper, and asked questions that made Professor Stewart smile and launch into 20-minute explanations. When he assigned the semester group project worth 40% of everyone's final grade, Ella volunteered to be group leader without anyone asking. The group she got randomly assigned was an absolute disaster from day one, and I knew it because I had access to all their submitted assignments. There was Gabe, who hadn't turned in a single homework on time, Isabel, who spent every class shopping on her laptop, Hudson, who showed up maybe once every 2 weeks, and another girl failing 3 other classes. Ella didn't know any of this when she walked up to them after class with a smile, already talking about meeting times. Ella started coming to my office hours every week asking for feedback on the project, and that's how I learned the group was even worse than I'd expected. She'd show me completed work and casually mention she was still waiting for Gabe's section, or that Isabel promised to do financial projections but hadn't started. At first she made excuses for them, saying Gabe had football practice even though I knew he'd been cut from the team last year. By midterm, Ella stopped making excuses and just looked exhausted, showing me her progress. She'd completed the entire market research section, written the competitive analysis, created all financial projections, and designed the PowerPoint slides completely alone. Every Tuesday and Thursday I saw her sitting in the same library study room through the glass walls, always by herself with her laptop and color-coded notebooks spread across the table. Once I walked by and heard her leaving a voicemail about meeting time, her voice still somehow cheerful. Nobody except Ella showed up to the practice presentation session, and Professor Stewart noticed immediately because the rest of her group had attended the previous class 2 days earlier. Ella delivered the entire 20-minute presentation by herself, switching between parts that were supposed to be delivered by different team members, doing it flawlessly even though her hands were shaking. Professor Stewart gave her feedback about minor improvements and asked where her team was, and Ella said they must have gotten confused about the date. After class, I heard her make a phone call, practically begging someone to show up for the final presentation. She said she'd done literally everything for the project and wasn't asking them to help anymore. She just needed them to show up and stand next to her for 20 minutes so they wouldn't lose points for missing team members. She even said she'd put their names on specific slides so all they had to do was stand there. The morning of final presentations, Ella showed up wearing a professional blazer with printed copies of the report for everyone. She kept checking her phone and looking at the door, and I watched her face go from hopeful to panicked to completely blank as minutes ticked by and Professor Stewart called their group. Ella walked to the front alone, took a deep breath, and said, "My group members couldn't make it today, so I'll be presenting our marketing analysis for Nike's expansion into sustainable athletic wear by myself." She gave another flawless presentation. After she finished answering questions, Professor Stewart started writing in his gradebook and announced to the class that her group would receive the automatic letter grade deduction, as stated in the syllabus. That's when Ella completely lost it and said, "Are you seriously going to give me the same grade as them when I'm the only one who bothered to show up?" The entire classroom went silent, and Professor Stewart told everyone to leave immediately, except Ella and me. Ella sat across from his desk, and something in her face changed completely, like watching someone finally decide they were done being nice. "You want to know why my group didn't show up?" she said in this voice I'd never heard before. "Because they're all shameless parasites who've been using me this entire semester, and I'm done covering for them." Professor Stewart started saying something about professionalism, but Ella cut him off and pulled out her phone. "Gabe told me he had football practice every day, but he got cut last year and spends afternoons getting high in his dorm," she said, scrolling through messages. "Here's the one time he responded, telling me to chill out because his dad would make sure everyone passed anyway." She kept going, voice getting louder, showing screenshot after screenshot of ignored messages, empty Google Drive logs, and emails where she begged for just 1 hour of help. Isabel hasn't looked at the project once. Hudson showed up to maybe 3 classes all semester, and they all knew I'd do everything because I actually care about my future. She stood up and slammed her phone on his desk, making Professor Stewart actually flinch. "I want them all to fail," Ella said. "Every single one deserves zeros, especially Gabe, who texted me last night saying I should be grateful for the opportunity to prove myself." Professor Stewart looked at the evidence for about 30 seconds, then leaned back and stared at Ella with this expression I'd never seen before. "Gabe is my son," he said in this completely flat voice that made the room feel like all the air had been sucked out. Full story on the channel below.